the hunger was a wolf inside her. It clawed at the empty space behind her ribs, a frantic, desperate thing that didn't care about pack law or the alpha's temper. It only cared about the ache. Her belly was a hollow drum, and every beat of her heart was a reminder of the gnawing void. Outside the thin walls of the Omega's den, a bitter wind howled a mournful song through the dying pines of the Blackwood territory. The sound was as empty as she felt. Just one more day, she told herself. A useless prayer she'd been whispering for 1,000 days. From her hiding spot in the shadows of the Great Hall, she watched her alpha, Kale, stand over the last of their winter stores. He was built like a boulder, wide and dense, with a temper that crashed and broke everything in its path. And he was a fool. He was a fool because his pride was bigger than his brain. He wanted to look strong for his warriors. That's why he was promising them a full feast tonight. A feast from a stockpile that was already little more than bones and dust. Her mind, a curse she had to hide, raced ahead. If he uses the salted meat now, there will be nothing left in a week. Nothing. But if he rations it, if he combines it with the winter root we gathered, it could last a month. Maybe more. The strategy bloomed in her head, sharp and clear. A perfect, life-saving plan. And her throat closed around the words, because she knew what happened when an Omega spoke out of turn. She still had the faint, silvery scar on her shoulder to prove it. Kale didn't like clever Omegas. The pack didn't like things they couldn't understand. More importantly, they didn't like anyone who reminded them of her mother. Without thinking, her fingers closed around the small, smooth object in her pocket. A small wooden wolf, worn almost featureless from years of her anxious touch. It was all she had left of her mother, the woman they called the Spirit Walker, the woman they executed for using forbidden magic, whatever that meant. No one ever told her the full story, only that her mother's power was a dark stain on their pack. Was that what this was? This sharp, clear way of seeing things? Was it a part of that forbidden magic? She didn't know what scared her more. The thought that it was, or the thought that it wasn't. Kale laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the bare walls, and slapped his second-in-command on the back. See? Plenty. We will feast and show the moon goddess we are not afraid of this winter. Deep down, she knew the truth. They weren't showing strength. They were marching toward starvation, and she let it happen. She stayed in her shadow, a ghost in her own home, and let her perfect, life-saving plan die on her tongue. It was safer that way. Survival was about being invisible. It was about being worthless. That's why she had to crush the part of her that screamed to speak up, to save them. But then, a horn blew. A single, deep, powerful note that was not their own. It rolled through the valley like thunder, shaking the very bones of their weak, hungry pack. Another followed, then another. A warning. An arrival. Without warning, every wolf in the hall froze. Kale's stupid, proud smile vanished. Fear, real and sharp, scented the air. This wasn't a random rogue. No. That sound was ancient. It was the sound of power. It was the sound of a king. In that moment, she felt it, clear as day. A tremor in the earth that had nothing to do with the cold. Something was coming. And just like that, everything changed.
The stench of desperation drifted on the wind. Lucian stood on the ridge overlooking the Blackwood Warren, a place that looked more like a festering wound than a territory. The trees were skeletal. The dens were collapsing. He could smell their fear, their hunger, their weakness. And it pleased him. Weakness could be used. Weakness could be broken. His second-in-command, Marius, a grizzled warrior with a face like a weathered map, stood beside him. Their sentries are a joke, my king. We could take this whole territory before moonrise. I don't want their territory, Marius, Lucian said, his voice a low rumble. I want their pride. His gaze was cold, a frozen sea of gray. He was here because he needed to secure his northern border. Kale of the Blackwood was a rabid dog, too stupid to be a real threat, but too unpredictable to ignore. Lucian needed to put a leash on him, and he would do it not with a battle, but with a single, perfectly aimed act of humiliation. A lesson. Truth be told, a small dark part of him craved the simplicity of a fight, the clash of claw and fang, the clean finality of it. But he was a king now, not just a warrior. And a king had to be smarter. He had to be colder. He had to be in control, always in control, because he knew what happened when control was lost. The memory hit him then, a sudden, sharp ambush from the past, the smell of blood and rain, the sound of his younger brother Leo choking out his name, the sight of the life leaving his two young eyes, all because Lucien had listened to his heart instead of his head. He had made a sentimental choice, a foolish emotional error in strategy, and Leo had paid the price. Never again. The thought was a vow he'd carved onto his own soul. He hardened his heart because love was a currency he could no longer afford to spend, and sentiment was the kind of poison that rotted a kingdom from the inside out. He had a duty to his people, and that duty required him to be a king of iron, not of flesh and blood. Not only that, it required him to see others not as people but as pieces on a chessboard. Alliances, enemies, pawns. Everyone had a purpose. And today, he was here to choose a pawn. He looked down at the pathetic valley, at the smoke rising from the shabby dens. Cale had beautiful daughters, everyone knew it, vain, cruel she-wolves who were as arrogant as their father. The world expected him to claim one of them as a prize to seal an alliance, a tribute, a bride. But then, an image of his brother's last pained smile flashed in his mind. "What's the point of power if you can't protect what you love, Lucien?" Leo had asked him once. The memory was a ghost that haunted his every decision. How could he protect his people if he allowed himself to feel anything at all? No, he would not choose a bride. He would choose a weapon, a symbol. He would choose the most pathetic, the most overlooked, the most worthless Omega Cale had to offer. He would take the one thing the Alpha considered trash and display it in his court. The humiliation would be a deeper wound than any sword. It would be a masterful, cold, and controlled move. The perfect move. He finally turned to Marius, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The ghosts of the past were pushed back into their cage. "Let's go," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It's time to collect our tribute."
The great hall was thick with tension. It was a living thing coiling in the air, making it hard to breathe. She stood in a line with the other unmarried she-wolves, her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the dirt floor. She could feel the stares. She could hear the whispers. Cale had shoved her to the very end of the line, next to the leaking barrels of fish brine, as a final, petty cruelty. The stench of it clung to her worn tunic. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the very floorboards. Her goal was simple: survive this. Just survive. With every heartbeat, she prayed the magnificent, terrifying king before them would not even see her.
He walked down the line, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His eyes, sharp and analytical, swept over the offerings. Kyle's daughters stood first, preening and proud, their scents a cloying mix of cheap perfume and ambition. They were beautiful, he supposed, in a brittle, obvious way. But they were worthless to him. He needed something else. His gaze continued down the line, past the nervous, hopeful faces, and then he saw her.
Her breath caught. He had stopped. He was looking at her. She didn't dare look up, but she felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch. It wasn't hungry like Cale's. It wasn't dismissive like the others. It was intense, piercing, as if he could see right through her skin, right through the pathetic, trembling Omega, and into the secret, screaming mind she kept locked away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. "Don't see me. Please, don't see me."
The moment their eyes locked, the world seemed to narrow. She was the one. At the end of the line, small and trembling, covered in the stink of fish. The others mocked her with their eyes, but he saw what they could not. Beneath the terror, beneath the dirt and the shame, there was a spark. A disciplined, watchful intelligence. Her scent wasn't just fear, it was something else. Something wild and hidden and strangely familiar, a scent like winter moonlight and buried secrets. In the span of a breath, his cold, calculated plan felt complicated. A flicker of an ancient, possessive instinct, something he hadn't felt since before Leo's death, stirred in his chest. A growl rose in his throat, and he forced it down. As if fate demanded it, Cale chose that moment to speak, his voice slick with contempt. "Pay her no mind, Your Majesty. She is Ruth, and she is worthless."
The word, worthless, hit her like a physical blow. It was the story of her life, spoken aloud for a king to hear. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the final wave of humiliation to crash over her. She waited for the king to laugh and move on.
A cold, dangerous smile touched Lucien's lips. Cale had just handed him the perfect weapon. And yet, the name hung in the air. Ruth. The protective instinct roared louder. He looked at the trembling girl and at the arrogant fool who scorned her. His decision was made. The plan was back on track. Before the words left his lips, he took a step forward, his shadow falling over her. The space between them burned. He ignored Cale completely. His voice, a low and commanding thunder that silenced every whisper in the hall, was for her and her alone. "I'll take her."
The king's words fell like stones into a silent pond. "I'll take her." 2 words. And just like that, her life was over. Her life was beginning. She couldn't tell which. Her blood went cold, then hot. The air left her lungs in a silent rush. He chose her? The worthless one, the ghost. It didn't make sense. Her thoughts spun, a whirlwind of confusion and terror. No, no, no. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. But then, 2 of the king's warriors, silent giants clad in dark iron and leather, moved to her sides. Their presence was overwhelming. Their scent was of cold steel, clean snow, and absolute power. It was nothing like the damp, desperate scent of her own pack. Without thinking, her hand went to her pocket, her fingers finding the smooth, familiar shape of her mother's wooden wolf. A tiny anchor in a world that had just been ripped from its moorings. Kyle finally found his voice. "You can't!" he sputtered, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "She's an Omega, a defective—"
Lucien didn't even turn his head. He let Cale's pathetic protest hang in the air for a moment, letting the Alpha feel the full weight of his own powerlessness. He had made his move, and the game was already over. Still, he felt an unexpected spike of fury at the word defective. It was an illogical, unprofessional emotion, which meant he had to crush it immediately. He finally shifted his gaze, a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Did you say something, Cale?" The question was soft, and it was the most dangerous sound the Blackwood Alpha had ever heard. The hall was dead silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Cale's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. No sound came out. Lucien had won not just the girl, but Cale's will to fight. Because true power wasn't about shouting. It was about making others fall silent. More importantly, he turned his back on the humiliated Alpha, a final, crushing dismissal. He looked at the girl, Ruth, and for the first time, addressed her directly. "You will come with me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sky is blue or the winter is cold.
Her body moved on instinct, 1 foot in front of the other. The 2 guards flanked her, creating a moving cage of muscle and steel. She was being led out of the great hall, away from the only life she had ever known. A life of hunger and shadows, yes, but her life. As she passed the threshold, she dared one last look over her shoulder. Cale was still frozen in place, his face a mask of pure, murderous hatred. And his eyes weren't on the king who had shamed him. They were on her. And in that moment, she knew a terrible truth. She hadn't just been claimed. She had been marked for death. The journey was a blur of things she'd never known. First, there was the warmth. One of the king's guards, without a word, draped a heavy cloak over her shoulders. It was lined with fur, so soft it felt like a whisper against her skin, and it smelled of cedar and strength. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years, and the gesture was so foreign, so unexpected that it brought tears to her eyes. She fought them back fiercely. Crying was a weakness she could not afford. Next, she was placed on a horse, a massive black war horse that seemed to listen to the king's thoughts alone. She had never been on a horse before. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, the powerful muscles moving beneath her, carrying her away, away, away. She watched the king, Lucian, she'd heard Kale say, ride at the head of the column. He rode with an easy, perfect grace, a part of his mighty beast. He never looked back, not once. It was as if she and her pathetic pack were already a forgotten memory, a piece of dust he'd brushed from his sleeve. Maybe that's all she was. A piece of dust. No matter how hard she tried to understand it, his choice made no sense. Why her? Was it a joke? A strange, cruel game played by a king who had everything? Her mind, the one thing that was truly hers, spun and spun, searching for a pattern, a strategy. But there was none. There was only the cold, hard fact of her reality. She was a prisoner, being taken to a foreign land for a reason she could not comprehend.
He could feel her watching him. He didn't need to look back. He could feel her stare on his shoulders, a strange, prickling sensation. It was distracting. He should be focused on the road, on the state of his warriors, on the reports he would receive upon his return. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting to the silent, terrified girl on his horse. He told himself it was a necessary assessment. He had acquired a new piece for his board, and he needed to understand its nature. He had seen the sharp intelligence in her eyes,